From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome. I'm Betsy Peterson, the director of the American Folklife Center here at the Library of Congress. And on behalf of the staff and everyone, I want to welcome you. And I also, for the record, want it to be reflected that we do have pretty much a full house, moving into standing room only. So at any rate, today's lecture, the Botkin Series lecture series is it allows the American Folklife Center to do a couple of things. It allows us to present the latest and the very best scholarship in folklore, ethnomusicology, oral history, cultural studies, and it also allows us to enhance our collections here at the American Folklife Center. All of these lectures are recorded, videotaped, and they become part of the permanent collections of the center. In addition, the lectures are also posted as webcasts so that people around the world can hear what we're talking about and listening to today, and they will also be available for generations to come. So with that said, let me ask you, if you have a cell phone on right now, please turn it off. Today I have the pleasure of introducing folklorist Pravina Shukla, who is an associate professor in the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology at Indiana University. Professor Shukla received her BA in anthropology from the University of California Berkeley and her MA and Ph.D. in folklore and mythology with a minor in art history from the University of California, Los Angeles. Pravina's research interests are wide-ranging, but she is best known for her studies of material culture, specifically dress and costume, folk art, museum studies, and foodways in India, Brazil, and the United States. She is the author of The Grace of Four Moons, Dress, Adornment, and the Art of the Body in Modern India. And she is the co-editor of The Individual and Tradition, Folklorist Perspectives, an IU Press book published in 2011. And her work has met with much critical praise. She's the winner of the Milia Davenport Award of the Costume Society of America for the best book on dress, and the Kumaraswamy Book Prize of the Association for Asian Studies for the best book on India in the English language. Her new book, however, Costume Performing Identities Through Dress, also an IU Press book, examines how costume functions to express identity in situated contexts full of intention and meaning. And let me point out at this moment that there are copies of the book out in the lobby, and I want to encourage all of you to please stick around, buy a copy, and have the author sign it. She's currently working on a new book on sacred art in contemporary Brazil. But so today, Pravina will be speaking on dressing the past, Civil War reenactors, Williamsburg historic interpreters, and exploring American identity through costumes. So please join me in making her welcome. Dr. Shukla.
Before I begin, there are a few seats. If you want to sit down. No? You want to stand? You might be more comfortable sitting down. Okay, let me get situated here. Can everybody hear me? Okay? Okay. The first thing I want to do before I begin is I want to start with my gratitude and my thanks to Betsy Peterson, to John Gold, and especially to Nancy Gross, who made this whole experience really, really effortless and easy for me. A look at contemporary costume reenactment events in the United States reveals that there are two key historical periods that are the most performed and the most watched. These two periods in American history, the Revolution and the American Civil War, are foci of pride and contention, subjects for serious scholarship, for popular fiction and film, and they serve as inspiration for costume performance by thousands of individuals. National preservation efforts have maintained and sometimes recreated the sites associated with these particular historical periods, and these become obvious locales for reenactment. 3 factors: well-preserved structures and landscape, accurate-looking costumes, and the sincerity of performance lead to a moving spectacle for the audience and heightened experience for the actor. The realistic looking and sounding demonstration often has the power of transporting you, the actor and the beholder, to a time and place that's being depicted, giving what is called a magic moment experience for both, a suspension of the temporal, an opportunity to travel back in time to an emotionally charged moment in the past. In 18th century garments at Colonial Williamsburg and in 19th century uniforms on the Civil War battlefield, modern Americans celebrate the nation's history for an amassed crowd of visitors. Yet, at the same time, the costumed actors take the opportunity to air their own political and cultural opinions while exploring significant aspects of their own identities, giving their own slant to a shared historical understanding. The American Revolution celebrates American freedom from England, yet slavery remains a problem and an institution, leading to the Civil War, in which the nation is at war with itself. How do we understand these historical periods in terms of the contemporary concern for race, gender, and political ideology? Many people, costumed historians of sorts, use their own knowledge and experience to explore these questions for themselves and for the visitors that interact with them at these historic sites. By observing and understanding the interpreters at Colonial Williamsburg Foundation Museum and at the Civil War battlefields, we see that the occasion for costume performance allows these individuals to fulfill personal desires while joining with others in collective public celebrations. Williamsburg served as the capital of colonial Virginia for 81 years, from 1699 to 1780 when the capital moved to Richmond. In 1926, philanthropist John D. Rockefeller Jr. founded the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, which included an outdoor museum comprised of a 301-acre historic area with 88 original buildings from the 18th and early 19th centuries. The initial goal was to bring the town back to, quote, the beauty and charm of 200 years ago. Rockefeller wanted more than to restore and preserve the past. He wanted to recreate and interpret colonial life through the museum. Scholarly precision and accuracy were the early goals, which led to careful architectural restoration and fabrication based on material culture research. Accurate buildings become a natural backdrop for costumed interpreters. The museum started dressing people in period clothing in 1934. The first 6 people to be costumed were female docents in the Raleigh Tavern, which led to fine reproductions to be worn by the hostess interpreters at the tavern and the governor's palace. Brenda Rosso, the person in charge of the costume, said that Colonial Williamsburg at this time was, quote, a colonial revival town. There was this romantic idea of old Virginia. In the 1970s, at the time of the bicentennial, with the rise of the serious study of American material culture and the stress on the Foundation's new curriculum on inclusiveness and social history, the costume started becoming better researched and more accurate. Today, the Costume Design Center creates and maintains accurate costumes for all the employees of the historic area. 59,000 articles of clothing are owned by the Foundation. They are made, altered, stored, cleaned, and tracked for 834 people in 1,500 positions. They were clothing of the period between 1769 and 1781, with 1774 as a base interpretive year. The accuracy of costumes frees the wearer to embody and communicate their version of their persona's role in the 18th century. Through interpretation, one is able to express deeply held personal values. Colonial Williamsburg allows for the expression of multiple messages that are embedded in its overarching educational mission. Costume interpreters are able to personalize the message while staying within the frame of the foundation. The foundation's 6 areas for emphases for accuracy in education are architecture, gardens, archaeology, decorative arts, history, and the historic trades, which include carpenters, blacksmiths, shoemakers, basket makers, tailors, and dressmakers. The historic trades allows the museum to present the cultures, lifestyle, and values of ordinary people by what they wear and what they make. This is a result of the museum's embrace in the 1980s of the new social history, often referred to as every man's history. Now the emphasis has shifted to from the colonial period to a more patriotic and specific theme, which is America on the eve of the Revolution. In the 2000s, the museum launched a street theater program called Revolutionary City. The story of the capital is now told through important residents, the nation builders, the highly identifiable persons of history. And these are George Washington on the screen right now, Martha Washington, Thomas Jefferson, the Marquis de Lafayette, and Patrick Henry, among others. The shift from everyman to famous man underscores a general American tendency to tell history through the lives of extraordinary individuals. The Marquis de Lafayette, for example. Some nation builders are well-known characters, such as Patrick Henry. Gowan Pamphlet, the Baptist slave preacher, is also a nation builder. The horrifying history of slavery presents a challenge that cannot be met in a museum of living history. By designating Gowan Pamphlet a nation builder, the museum brings the topic of slavery to the forefront of its educational agenda. Gowan Pamphlet is portrayed by the charismatic actor-interpreter James Ingram. James has been reenacting the character for over 20 years. James taught me that Gowan Pamphlet was an extraordinary individual. He was literate at a time when only 20% of the population of Virginia could read and write. He secretly ministered the new religion to his fellow slaves and eventually received his freedom, founding what was later known as the First Baptist Church of Williamsburg. A nuanced understanding of slavery can be gleaned from interacting with James in his role as Gowan Pamphlet, for he is articulate, educated, well-dressed, a disruption to the stereotype of a slave in tattered clothes and ungrammatical speech. James told me that as an African-American man, he finds it important to portray Gowan Pamphlet in Williamsburg. Quote, "Telling the story of enslaved people allows me to not only tell the story of my own past, but a story of America. But it's also giving a voice to those that didn't have a voice. We have a real high mission here, this mission to tell this story because it wasn't a story that they were able to tell. Many of these people did not have an opportunity to write their story down. And so uniquely, through what I do every single day, I'm honoring them that have gone before me, for those that are here, but mainly for the future. It's the children. The children are my mission here because many of them don't know their history, and really doesn't matter, black, white, doesn't matter your color. They don't know the history of America and how they fit in that puzzle. And so it's my duty and my mission every single day to get up, to go out, to prove to people that this story was part of the American story." End quote. James's educational mission is to teach about the complex, nuanced, and troubling institution of slavery by considering the environmental, emotional, social, and economic factors that varied from time and place. For example, the tobacco country of Virginia in the 18th century versus the cotton plantation of the Deep South in the 19th century, what most people think of when they think of slavery in the United States. The current emphasis on America on the eve of the Revolution leaves out the culture, lifestyle, and values of ordinary people. Within this educational mission, individuals compensate by emphasizing those people less celebrated, including the poor people and women. During the first 50 years of Colonial Williamsburg, the common people served as context for the extraordinary citizens, the nation builders who Rockefeller called the great patriots. The costume focus has always been on the beautiful gowns and the fine military uniforms. The story of working people is generally lost from history books and it's usually missing from living history events as well, including here. Basket maker Terry Thon, among others, sees it as her mission to fill the gap of historical knowledge by interpreting the life of the, quote, lower sort people at Colonial Williamsburg. Terry has worked at Colonial Williamsburg for over 25 years, and she was the first female coachman at the museum. She told me she likes talking about the baskets as a way to open the topic of social class because the people who make baskets were generally poor. Terry sees her costume as providing an opportunity to discuss social class, as a door to many things, but also as a prop for the visitor, since visitors often are at a loss for appropriate topics to engage a costumed interpreter, and questions about what they are wearing become an obvious entry point. Terry told me, quote, "It's a great educational opportunity to be able to talk with people about why I'm wearing what I am." Sorry, I have this habit. I had to put my hair up because it bothers me. I prefer to talk about the lower sort people because I really think they get a short shrift here. Everyone likes the beautiful gowns, and I really like the working clothes. They're extremely comfortable, and even in hot weather, they're nice. And people are very curious about them. It opens up an opportunity to talk to people about the costumes and about my place in history here. How many people actually wore these as opposed to the silks and satins and the beautiful gowns? I just think it's very important to let people know that many of our people are the poorest, just like today. Not everyone has a lot of money, end quote. Terry's educational mission is admirable, for she has a personal interest in expanding the mainstream story. Once a male visitor asked her, "Don't you feel ridiculous wearing those clothes?" Recounting the incident, Terry told me that she told the man, "No, not at all, because this is my history. I'm very proud to be wearing part of my history. And I can tell you right now, my people were poor. I'm wearing exactly what they would be wearing." Terry is from Virginia. Her mother's family goes back to the 18th century. She is literally representing a part of her own personal history. Sarah Woodyard is a stylish apprentice dressmaker at the Margaret Hunter shop on the Duke of Gloucester Street. Her personal mission is to educate the museum guests about women's history, adding another conceptual layer to the need of inclusiveness. Sarah describes the lives of 18th century women, while Terry tells of the local poor, and James discusses the plight of African Americans at the time. All this enlarges the flashy story of the prominent men and a few women who shaped America on the eve of the Revolution. At Colonial Williamsburg, guests learn about history through the interpretation of the costumed staff. But the employees of the historic trades also learn through direct engagement with historic objects and replicas, using period and reproduced tools and techniques. Sarah Woodyard studied garment construction, women's studies, and economic history at The Ohio State University. She has, however, learned much by wearing and making 18th century women's clothing. For example, many visitors wonder about the stays, the corsets, which women of the period wore, and that undergarment provides a way for Sarah to discuss 18th century women's bodies. Sarah said, quote, "A lot of people seem to see this as this constricting anti-feminist garment that was restricting women, but when you wear it, it becomes part of you. And you don't notice that you're wearing it. I mean, you do to some degree because they keep you upright and they support you. But I don't feel like somebody's holding me down, I guess. I feel like it's a practical thing to be wearing. It's what you got." Sarah, a student of 19th century clothing and labor history, came to Colonial Williamsburg with an open mind about wearing stays and petticoats. With an interest in recent approaches to material culture study, costume history, and women's history, she's, quote, "interested in history first, feminism second." Sarah believes that many visitors view 18th century women through 21st century eyes, projecting a contemporary understanding of gender politics onto the people of the past. Sarah said, quote, "And I don't want to impose 1970s feminism on the 18th century. I don't think that history is progressive by any means, and that's something that is fascinating to me because people think that women had no rights in the 18th century, and they certainly had rights then," end quote. Women had rights, and they enhanced their social and economic status by working as dressmakers and milliners. Sarah explained the 18th century pre-industrial era gown making was a higher skill because it was an apprentice trade. Yet sometimes history would degrade the work of women in the home. In the 18th century, women are working in the home, but they're getting paid for their work and contributing to the household income while fulfilling domestic duties. At Colonial Williamsburg, as we have seen, costumed interpreters strive to broaden the historical knowledge of the visitor by filling in the gaps created by conventional history, namely the gaps of race, socioeconomic class, and gender. The story of the affluent and influential men of American history gets enhanced by adding the voices and costume bodies of African Americans, women, and the working class. The institution of Colonial Williamsburg has established a pedagogical framework, yet the interpreter sees the opportunity to adjust and fine-tune the foundation's agenda to reflect their own concerns. Colonial Williamsburg historian Carrie Carson says the museum is a classroom. The staff members are team teachers, and the interpreters in turn are little professors. Through interviews and first-hand observation, ethnographic fieldwork, we see how interpreters, nation builders, and those in the historic trades connect with the visitors and teach history by utilizing their own knowledge and experience, delivering lessons that are derived from a personally constructed curriculum taught to 1 million visitors that pass through Colonial Williamsburg every single year. On the screen is Taylor Markhutter addressing a group of school kids. One mythic national moment of origin is the American Revolution. Another is the Civil War, a period of 4 years when the country fractured and mended again. Over 50,000 people, mostly men, reenact the events of the American Civil War in locations across the country. Some camp, drill, and fight as a common soldier would. Others assume the persona of a famous general and address the visitors. The impetus for preservation of history, of the battlefields, and of significant architectural structures, such as the Liberia Plantation in Manassas, Virginia, on the screen right now, once again leads to reenactment. The conserved locale becomes a backdrop for theatrical action, for the performance of history, identity, and political ideology. The reenactments take place near but not on the actual preserved battlefields, but they often occur during the anniversary of the battles, allowing the costumed soldier to experience the terrain, the actual weather of the site 150 years ago. Male camaraderie, sociability, and personal pleasure are among the reasons why these men spend thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours in hot wool uniforms on the battlefields, portraying the men who fought and died in the American Civil War. Some, such as John Schlatter, for example, have always had an interest in history, and this hobby allows for continuous self-education. Others, such as Jay Vogel, enjoy the time with fellow veterans, tapping into a shared military experience. For reenactors who are military veterans, the journey through history to a war of the past can return them to their own combat experience. Jay Vogel said that with special permission from the National Military Park, he and others have been able to retrace the steps of Pickett's charge on July 3rd on the anniversary of the famous Confederate March that led to over 10,000 Civil War soldiers to be killed or wounded. Jay told me, quote, "Once we cross Emerson's Pike, we know what's happening to the men at this time. they're starting to come under heavy musketry fire. The group gets quiet as they walk, somber in light of the real lives that were lost here. As we cross, there's a total release of emotion. During the charge, Jay uses his own history to connect to his own experiences, channeling the feelings of those doomed soldiers. Quote, "For me, it brings back memories of my past in the military. That's when I truly understand what's going on," end quote. He told me that when he was in the Marine Corps, he lost 4 friends in Beirut, and he's reminded of that time during reenactment. Pickett's charge carries extra emotion when Jay recalls his own losses, and he limits how often he seeks the experience. Quote, "I can only handle doing this so often. I do it about once every 2 years now. If I need it more emotionally, I would. I probably couldn't handle it. It's emotionally draining." Reenacting the Civil War connects Jay to his own military past and that of his ancestors, as he told me, quote, "I had relatives who fought on both sides of the war. Both got wounded on the peach orchard on the same day. Ties me back to my family, my past." For many men, being a Civil War soldier is a way to express regional identity. Mark Lapointe reenacts with the 28th Massachusetts, and we have a member of the 28th Massachusetts in the audience so that this is recorded in the forever. He is from Massachusetts. Reenacting a Union soldier is partly about connecting to his regional identity. Mark says, quote, "I'm from the North, that's where I grew up, so I can relate to the history, the people that lived there at the time, and I can get to know their stories. You know, my heritage is Northern." He continued, "I'm a huge Abraham Lincoln fan, so I think it would be a disservice to his memory to fight for the Confederacy. I don't believe or condone slavery in any way, and I'd hope that if I were alive during that period, I would feel the same way." Mark Sloan is also a Northerner from Pennsylvania, but he chooses to reenact as a Confederate soldier, for he feels himself to be, quote, "Southern at heart." He is here second from right, with the 21st Georgia in Manassas made up mostly of men from New York. Mark read voraciously about the Civil War, and the more he read, the more he was drawn to the Southern side, he told me. Mark said, quote, "In most cases, the South was vastly outnumbered in men, arms, and supplies, yet being led by General Lee, Jackson, Hood, and Longstreet, and others, the Army of Northern Virginia won battle after battle. So the South went into the battles as underdogs, not a chance in hell of pulling off a victory. Yet they came out victorious. So that's what draws my inward being to the South." He continued, "So many Southern units are portrayed by guys who live in the North. On the other hand, you will find very few guys from the South portraying a Union soldier. They usually will dress Confederate. Still a lot of ill feeling about the war, even though it was 150 years ago," end quote. Reenacting as a private allows for personal communication among your fellow soldiers. On the other hand, many people choose the role of a living historian, engaging in active education and direct communication with the public, explaining life in the 1860s and also describing and interpreting the tactics and strategies of the generals they portray. You're looking at Dwight Hensley as Confederate Major General Richard Garnett. These reenactors are closer to the actor-interpreters at Colonial Williamsburg in their ability to address a crowd of visitors. Mike Sipes is from Maryland. His research revealed that an ancestor fought in the Confederate 2nd Maryland Battalion. So Mike found a unit in Baltimore that portrayed the 2nd Maryland Cavalry dismounted, and he joined to honor my ancestors' history. But he later started portraying Confederate Lieutenant General Jubal Early on the screen right now. He told me that portraying General Early is his calling. He believed he was on a mission. He gave up reenacting with the 2nd Maryland because, quote, "Really, I don't want to be out there. I want to be here." here among the generals who are living historians, not out there among the privates in battle. For Mike, the Civil War provides a way to connect to his ancestors, and through his impersonation of a general, to act on a personal political ideology. This is, in fact, a driving force for many Civil War reenactors, to use history as a way to critique what they perceive to be a growing power of an expanding central government. It is one reason to don the authentic uniform, as Mike says, quote, "When people come up to me and they say, 'Why? How do you put on a wool uniform, stand in 95-degree weather?' I go, 'This is why. History needs to be taught.'" Niles Clark also uses his platform to write history. Niles is from Indiana, though I met him in Virginia. He portrays Major General George E. Pickett, the flamboyant Virginia officer, and he is in fact endorsed by the George Pickett Society and makes appearances at the general's gravesite in commemoration of the anniversary of his death. Niles sees his mission as educating those around him, quote, "See, there's truths out there. People will look for them, and that's the main thing about learning anything. You got to look for the truth. You can't just take what someone has written or put in a movie for granted. We search, and I read." Wearing the uniform of Major General Pickett, he tells, quote, the southern side of the story in his northern state of Indiana to, quote, "fix what they're learning wrong." Niles Clark, among others, dresses as a Confederate general and argues that the federal government were taking away states' rights that the Constitution granted. So Lincoln's actions were in violation of what the Constitution guaranteed to each state. Niles told me, quote, "We can even look at the powers that be now. They're trying to undermine the Constitution. It's our rights being taken away, and that's not what we formed this country for," end quote. Wearing uniforms of the Civil War era and talking to visitors about the 19th century is a way to comment on the current situation. Contemporary men from northern states dress as Confederate generals and pass judgments on the Obama administration, while ostensibly speaking about President Abraham Lincoln's presidency. But for some, the responsibility of dressing as a general is to keep personal opinion out of the portrayal of historical figures. Jim Optenegger is an artist from Pennsylvania, and he portrays Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, and he often reenacts with his family. He believes that the living historian should not use a historical persona to further his own political agenda. He told me, quote, "I've always had an issue with this because I'm listening to you, not the general, and it's hard to separate the two because you don't know one and you're trying to do one through the other, and that's the problem I have here. But to push any kind of agenda, I think, is wrong." The teacher at the Civil War site, Jim told me, should not argue from 21st century attitudes because no matter how much you study, quote, "you'll never know how they truly felt. You'll never know deep inside. You can gather facts, but ultimately you're interpreting the actions of someone else." Jim speaks both in the third person and in the first person, speaking as General Sherman. He told me, quote, "You say his name now, and the first thing you hear is, oh, he's the bad one. You have to listen to the stories. That's what we do in living history. It gives us a chance to explain and answer questions and to interact with the people, as opposed to the regular reenactments where they sit while the troops do what happened in the field and then it's over. But this gets you a chance to go one-on-one. We learn stuff from spectators. They learn stuff from us. But I want to tell them who Sherman was, why he did this, why he did that. You say, this is what happened, and this is what didn't happen. And you can judge for yourself. You can walk away and still hate the guy. That's your prerogative. I don't mind." End quote. The range of reasons to reenact can include having fun and hanging out with your buddies. For some, it's an opportunity to express personal regional pride, as it is for Ed Mann, on the screen, a South Carolina man who portrays Confederate General Stonewall Jackson. or it's an avenue to express political ideology. Yet for others, such as Jim, who portrays General Sherman, it's a commitment to unbiased historical accuracy. Frank Orlando takes his mandate for accuracy and precision one step further. He believes that a truthful portrayal fosters not only the general historical record, but the individual being portrayed. And also, it's a service to the contemporary visitor. His personal mission is a mandate for accuracy, accuracy of uniform, of attitude, of history. Frank, a retired school teacher from Pennsylvania, portrays Confederate General Robert E. Lee. And his wife, Bonnie, portrays Mary Custis Lee, here at the Gettysburg National Military Park. They're both deeply committed to accuracy. Quote, we refuse to walk around here and be inaccurate historically, because we're doing the tourists here an injustice, and we're doing ourselves an injustice as well, because if we want to get into that persona, into the character, then, and think like them, then we must look like them as well, end quote. General Lee, according to Frank, wore a particular shade of wool called cadet gray, a color closer to blue than Confederate gray. He spent 5 months searching for the right seamstress who helped him order the wool fabric from the same factory in Richmond, Virginia that made General Lee's original uniform during the Civil War. The fabric had to be custom made. It took 6 months. But Frank believes that, quote, it was well worth the wait. So now, when I do impressions of Lee, I know what I'm wearing is historically accurate. I also have a belt, presentation belt, that is accurate. It's an exact copy of the one that Robert E. Lee wore. And then the belt buckle was actually cast from Robert E. Lee's belt buckle at the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond, Virginia. So you try to be as accurate as you possibly can, end quote. Frank looks like General Lee, which humanizes a historical figure. He enters a persona from the outside, just as theater actors do. Frank engages in something some people have called method reenacting. The result is an amalgamation of the actor with the historical persona, and Frank Orlando admitted to me, quote, it gets to the point where I have a difficult time differentiating between Robert E. Lee and myself. You know, it almost meshes. And so that makes it quite interesting, end quote. His goal is not just persona, though. He has a higher pedagogical agenda. He's a teacher. Frank admires Robert Lee's leadership skills. Through his impersonation, he hopes to, quote, impress upon people, today's people, how important duty was to the people of the 1850s and 1860s. Frank feels a double responsibility, one for truth and accuracy to the visitor, the other for honesty to the memory of General Lee. Quote, I wouldn't want to slight Robert E. Lee by doing something in public that he would be ashamed of. You know, he's not with us anymore. Robert E. Lee died in 1870, end quote. While portraying General Lee, Frank gets to embody military strategy and moral responsibility, but also chivalry and charm, traits generally missing from contemporary political leaders. I don't have to tell you that. Just look at the news at any moment and you know what I'm talking about. Biased or unbiased education is a prerogative of the living historian and Civil War battlefields. Unlike Colonial Williamsburg, where there is an overarching pedagogical agenda mandated by a ruling body, everyone at a battlefield is on his own to do his own research, to write his own script, and to give whatever slant to history he chooses. These men don authentic-looking uniforms and teach themselves their personas biography and combat strategies, engaging in the main goal of the living historian, that of public education. The accurately attired persona becomes a vehicle for instruction for thousands of people every summer in the battlefield. History, heritage, and education combine in the Living History Museum and in the Civil War battlefield. At Colonial Williamsburg, history is self-consciously reconstituted and interpreted by a team of trained professionals with an institutional pedagogical agenda. where both authenticity and public education drive the costume choices. Interpreters at Colonial Williamsburg participate in educational celebration of the nation's political heritage. Within the frame, as we saw today, they are free to follow personal agendas of race, class, and gender. Civil War reenactors are self-directed. They invest their own money and research skills to authenticate the uniforms they wear. Their internal drive for authenticity allows them to engage in a personally defined educational mission to impart historical knowledge to the general public. Operating as individuals, not living historians in a museum, they are free to pursue personally satisfying actions of camaraderie and male bonding, self-education, and they are permitted to express their own opinions about the historical events, often using the 19th century as a foil to make contemporary criticism of the government. Accurate costumes play a vital role in enhancing the experience of visitors and participants at many kinds of historic sites. The difference among historic sites holds implications for costuming decisions. Levels of authenticity and motivation may vary, but the sincerity of the participants makes for meaningful expressions in costume. In Civil War reenacting, the abundance of data leads to a sense of authenticity in uniform. At Colonial Williamsburg, specialized scholarship ultimately makes authentic costumes possible. By considering costumes in these two locations, linked by concerns for history, heritage, and accuracy, we find that a satisfying level of authenticity can be achieved by reenactors, allowing them to envision and reconstruct a personalized piece of the wearable past. Whether during a bloody Civil War or during the nationally mythic moment of the American Revolution, costumes draw their wearers and beholders into a deep place of emotion, of philosophical reference, of aesthetic fulfillment. Whether they participate actively or passively, costumed interpreters and their beholders travel together to other times in our nation's history, and then return once more to the present tense, hopefully a little bit wiser. Thank you very much. I know people are on their lunch break, so you can leave. Nobody will be hurt. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Betsy.
With the Civil War reenactors, where it's a personal sort of thing and the research is done individually, when they come together, what if people show up as the same person? I mean, are there 5 different tickets who show up?
Yeah.
And how do they negotiate all of that? And how do they negotiate the sense of, or the group sense of accuracy? I mean, if someone disagrees with someone else's costume, how is all of that negotiated and handled?
That's a very, very good question. It has a lot of different parts. So one of them is most of the people who reenact the American Civil War are soldiers. So they're part of groups, troops. And they do have somebody internally, as well as a lot of the battlefields have somebody who's checking for accuracy. So if you're wearing something inaccurate, you can't be part of it. I mean, you would agree with this. So there's a lot written about. If you look at the, in my book, now I'm hawking the book that's for sale there. In the book out there, there are in the footnotes all these different, Shiloh and Manassas, all these things have little, when you sign up to reenact, there are rules about what you can wear, what you can't wear, what kinds of glasses, what kind of wristwatch, what kind of clothing. So there's a lot of that. There's also a lot of internal pressure where somebody will make fun of you for being a farb, for not actually wearing something appropriate and authentic. So that's one. But for these generals, the generals that you saw, the photographs are from Gettysburg and Manassas. And they were part of organized groups, Lee's lieutenants, and federal troops, I think the other people were. And they have one grant, but today the grant can come, you're our backup grant. Sherman can come, you're a backup Sherman. So they only have one of each. Okay. And they're in these living history camps. and they're sitting there with their name on a plaque, like, hello, I'm General Sherman. So they're there to tell you about history, whereas the troops are just there. You see them from really far away. They do the battle, and then you may or may not interact with them in the same way. Those people have a big platform in which you go and talk to them. Does that answer all your questions? Yes?
I think along with that, I'm wondering if you can speak to specifically with those who are involved in interaction, the complexity of first person versus third person interpretation, and how, or if that has.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question too. So I live in Indiana. We have something called Conner Prairie, which has, so Conner Prairie is a living history museum. And the joke is you go there and you say, like, hi, I came here in my car. And they go, what's a car? I don't know what a car is. And it just gets, sometimes it gets in the way of, like, yeah, you know what a car is. Let's, answer my question. So at Colonial Williamsburg, they talk in the first person, in the present tense. But they can say, like with the tailor that you saw a picture of, Mark Hutter, he said somebody's going to say, what about the sewing machine? What about the cotton gin? And he can say the cotton gin has not been invented yet. Like, so he understands, he's not pretending, because there's something lost there if you pretend like, I don't know what the cotton gin is. What is a sewing machine? So at Williamsburg, purposely, they are allowed to say, we understand what that is. That hasn't happened yet. The Civil War hasn't happened. It's not going to happen for another 100 years or whatever it is. So they are able to do that. These living historians also go in first and third person. They go back and forth. So they'll talk as General Longstreet, or they'll talk as themselves about General Longstreet. So they do both, and I think that makes for better education, personally. So I come to this, I'm a teacher, I come to this as a teacher, and I think that makes it easier for everybody. Yes, Steve.
So I'm part of a reenacting group that actually reenacts the U.S. Navy during the War of 1812, which is pretty specific.
And I'm very disappointed you're not in costume.
I know, I couldn't do that today. But one of the things that's interesting, we have a subset of people who are primarily singers and sing songs of the era, which is one of the reasons I'm in the group. And one of the things that's interesting about the songs of the era is that they often feature women who dress as men and go to sea or go to war. And because of that, we frequently have within the group one or two women who are reenacting ostensibly male characters, but they're reenacting women who are dressing as men or cross-dressing as men. And I wonder if that's something you've encountered, and what kind of issues have come up along gender lines with these war reenactors.
I have not, at both Gettysburg and Manassas, there were in these photographs that both Henry and I took of all this massive reenactors, troops, there were women, but I didn't actually talk to any of them. But we know for a fact in the American Civil War there were a lot of women who cross-dressed as men, and all the ways in which they negotiated physical problems of going to the bathroom, or, so there was wonderful ways in which they were able to fight for whatever reason, to be with their sweethearts for patriotic reasons, but I did not. And I think I'd love to continue this work and maybe look at that a little bit more, but I have not done that. Yes?
Yeah, have you ever spoken to any European reenactors, and did you find any differences?
No, I have not. I've read about European reenactments in Spain and in a lot of different parts of Scandinavia, especially Sweden. I have not, but one of the case studies in my costume book is the Society for Creative Anachronism, which is reenacting in the U.S., in essence, battles in Europe. So there is that kind of disjoint of we're not there. The clothing that you'd be wearing in Northern Europe is too hot for the summer in Southern United States. So there is that problem. In Europe, obviously, you're going to be in Europe. The history is much longer there, right? Deeper. And there's a lot more interest in archaeology and material culture in that way. So from what I understand, I have not personally studied Europe. Reenactment groups, the emphasis on material culture research is pretty good, particularly archaeology. But that's the extent of what I know. Yes, Jim.
You seem to be saying, you're referring to actors, interpreters for Revolutionary War and reenactors. So is there a difference between acting and reenacting?
I'm using that term because that's a term they use. Colonial Williamsburg, they call themselves actor-interpreters, so I'm using the term that they actually use. That does not have a judgment on my part about who's a better actor. But some of the Colonial Williamsburg people they don't just walk, so they have this revolutionary city, little mini plays. I don't know if anybody's been there recently, somewhat recent. So you get a schedule. Monday at 3, they'll be doing this at this tavern, this somewhere else. But sometimes they do get up on stage. So some of those are more trained. They see themselves as actors. They're not just walking around in costume. They're delivering lines. They have blocking. They have, and some of these Civil War reenactors do get up. We went to the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and there was a big stage with 2,000 people in the audience, and Generals Lee and Longstreet Pickett were discussing, Hood were discussing the strategy. So they were acting to some extent, but not all of these people considered. A lot of reenactors are not actors. They're just there for the pleasure of being with other friends of theirs. So they're not actually acting in the sense of delivering lines, but some are. So there is an internal difference, I guess. Anybody? Yes?
Thank you for your presentation. Enjoyed it very much.
Thank you.
Since the mid-90s, I've been involved with a lot of Civil War reenacting and living history events, but for the purpose of exploring the music. And it was always interesting to see the dialogue taking place, not only in terms of the material culture, but also in terms of the repertoire and interpretation, and the difference between people that are very focused on ideas about being authentic and having accurate reproduction material, yet they might show up with their 1979 Gibson Mastertone banjo as opposed to a reproduced 1850s instrument. To what degree are you seeing the material culture related to music and the dialogues that go along with that in terms of the repertoire and context?
I don't know enough about that to give you an answer that would tell you more than you already know, but I'll tell you one thing. If you've been to Gettysburg or any of these reenactments, part of what facilitates the authenticity in material culture, not musical instruments, but weapons and uniforms, is that there are specialized shops that are selling these things. To some extent, you don't have to really do your own research. You show up at one of these reenactments. They have a little village thing with that food and hot dogs and whatever, and they also have a place that sells the uniforms, the shaving things, the socks, the shoes. So some of it is easier. It has to do with just being able to purchase it versus maybe in other aspects of material culture that are not military, not uniform-based, you'd have to do your own research, and that's where some people's research skills would differentiate. I don't know if that was a good enough answer, but. Yes, Alan.
Following up on Betsy's question, well, I'll phrase it this way. Karen and I have done work with Decoration Day events, right. and I got fascinated with the fact that asking people, well, who orchestrates it all? Who invites the preacher? And which preacher? Who makes the decision about this and that and the other? Amazingly, sometimes I could not find an answer. There was no puppet pulling on the strings and making it all happen in a coordinated way. And so I got fascinated by this sort of grassroots, consensus-guided way of decision-making. And it sounds to me like, it's one thing for interviews to deal with how you present yourself, but how do you decide on Pickett's charge, how to charge and where to stop and who falls and things like that? Is there somebody making those decisions?
There are, and they're generals, they're people in charge of the troop, and then at some point they'll be like, okay, it's been 10 minutes, somebody has to die, right? So at some point people are like, we have to start dying, and come on. And then one of the guys I showed, the guy from Massachusetts 28, he has this wonderful moment in which I said, do you ever have the magic moment? And he said, I do. Are you ever transported back to the Civil War era? He says, I do when I die, because then I am alive, my eyes are closed, and I can hear. And just the sound of all of that, of people running, people falling, people screaming, to him brings him to the Civil War era, because he says, because it goes back to the answer I gave Betsy, he says visually people are much older and much bigger than they were in the Civil War. They don't really, that Stonewall Jackson guy is maybe 100 pounds heavier than Stonewall Jackson was himself. So, they don't really look like them necessarily, because we just have different body types now than we did 100 years ago. But sometimes the sound and dying in that respect allows certain people to experience a deeper version of that. I just want to say one more thing. This is not your question. I'm just going to add to your question. The difference between these two groups, the Colonial Williamsburg people they're employed at the museum. Somebody's doing everything for them. Every single thing about them is provided to them. The background of their character, their clothing, etc. These Civil War guys are doing all their own research. They're spending a lot of their own money, a lot of time, and there's something very admirable to me, to the fact that they're doing that. One of the guys I showed, Jay Vogel, the guy who does the Pickett's Charge, he actually reenacts as Longstreet. And he took the entire curriculum that Longstreet had read at West Point and read it all so that he would understand what did Longstreet know in order to be able to come up with this military strategies. He's doing that in his spare time. The man is a computer programmer. That's not his job. So what I love is that they're spending so much time educating themselves. And sometimes there are some people who are at least, they have, they get together, they will, there are coordinated efforts. You have to pay insurance, you have to be organized to some extent, but a lot of it's self-motivation, and that's really admirable. It's really easy to make fun of these guys. They put on wool uniforms. It's wonderful. I mean, God, if everybody would just spend this much time educating themselves about a topic, it would be really great. Danielle.
Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
I was just talking with a friend of mine whose son would dearly love to be a reenactor, but he doesn't have the money for it. And he found someone who was willing to give him an outlay of an entire uniform that he couldn't wear anymore because he had grown larger. And but it was a Confederate uniform. And this boy decided not to do that because he didn't want to be perceived as supporting some of the so the idea of the Confederate flag as a resurgence of white power and things like that, right? And so I've been thinking a lot about this merging of fictional and real worlds and how that the embodiment of putting on a costume really sort of blurs that in really interesting ways. And like when you're talking about film or stage or even Williamsburg as a site of reenactment, you've still got that distance where there is a performance space, right? And so on the battlefield, did you find anyone who like purposefully introduced an anachronism in order to sort of keep themselves grounded in the real world instead of like being completely absorbed in this enactment?
Did I, Henry? Because I did in the other, the book looks at costume in different contexts. And in the theater, it ends with the theater actor on the theater stage. That's the most professional. So it begins with Halloween. I'll just make this thing, to all the way to the most professional. So there's a continuum. And in the end, in the theater chapter, a lot of actors, this is my necklace, it's me, Pravina. It reminds me I'm Pravina playing Juliet. So the actors on the theater stage do that, but I can't remember if we saw anything like this here. Did we? Okay. I have two memories. One is here and one's over there. No, but that's an interesting point. The point, it was, I think, obvious, but I'm just going to say it again. I, as a regular person, would not have the opportunity to stand in front of 2,000 people and pass judgment on the contemporary government. But if I'm General Longstreet and I'm standing, so a lot of people really seize the opportunity of like, it's not me, it's those people. And that allows every example of costume. It's not me, I'm just a regular professor, but really this slutty, milkmaid that I am right now is not me, but it is. It's just a version of yourself. So, and that's when people use this platform to show something that's deep, that should not come out, but it does come out. And that's absolutely what a lot of people are doing. And I don't think, it's not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. I'm a shy person, but I want to be this wild and crazy, funny person. So I do it every October 31st. It's the one time I can do it. So, and that does happen a lot with Civil War reenacting, where it's, no, it's not me. I'm a nice person, but I'm, portraying this Confederate soldier. Yes, Diana.
Hi, again, thank you. This is wonderful, and I love your books.
Thank you.
I'm curious, with the remaking of Roots, there was a real attempt to correct some of the some of the incorrect costuming as well as statements and the understanding of slavery has developed since the first group was done. Do you find that with reenactors or actors like at Williamsburg and other places that people talk about a evolution of their thought?
Oh yeah. Absolutely, no, and absolutely. So you go to, it's not even just costume, it's material culture in general. You go to a historic, reproduced, recreated museum, house museum. Every city has 100 house museums, the first president of whatever, the first, and all of those by looking at, we took a tour of these plantation houses in South Carolina, and by looking at the different rooms, the accuracy or how the furniture and the wood and the wallpaper was done, you can tell when the room is not telling you as much about 1870. It's telling you about 1970 versus 1990 versus 2010, when these particular ways of preserving and conserving and fabricating material culture was. So the same thing, right? If you look at the costume of Queen Elizabeth I in movies and in theater and photographs, you can tell when that costume, it doesn't say about her in 16 whenever, 15 whatever, it says about when we thought that was how she looked. So absolutely, it says as much about our contemporary views about conservation, honestly, and recreation and costume as it does about the period that's being depicted. And that's actually very, very interesting to do, to look at that and try to figure out when was this thing done. Thank you. Oh, Cliff.
I'm curious about definitions of impersonator versus reenactor versus living historian versus storyteller, and if there's boundaries of race there. If I think of storytelling associations in Maryland, for instance, and Harriet Tubman impersonators or storytellers who impersonate Harriet Tubman, I feel like I never get the term reenactor is never utilized. Does that come into play when you're dealing with an individual as opposed to a generic American? I wonder. Another is, I know someone who's a Sally Hemings impersonator. Maybe we've talked about this where she does, like, you can work out with Sally and she'll share with you her observations of Thomas Jefferson and her critique of contemporary
You
society.
can work out with her?
Yeah, so she'll go and do workout in a gym with you dressed as Sally Hemings and offer.
Why?
It's an interesting. It's not my thing. I don't do this. So
Then how do you know so much about it?
She's a friend of mine, so I'll share that with you. But it's an interesting thing, right? So confounding perceptions of people being a certain way at a certain period of time, and trying to kind of expand that as, constants in humanity and all. Anyhow, I'm just curious. Are there boundaries between living historians and reenactors and impersonators?
Again, my interpretation of this, yes. So the theater actors in the last chapter of my book talk about I am this character only when I am, because one of the questions I asked one of my actor informants was, when do you become that character? When do you stop being you and become that character? In the back, when you put on the wig, when you put on the face, when you put on the voice? And she said, I am only that character. That character only lives on that stage with that set with those other characters there. The character is only going to live. So if you are reenacting an actual character in a play, in a piece of fiction, that character does not live outside of that time period, right? Created by William Shakespeare. Now, what about Sally Hemings? What if I am Sally Hemings at Monticello versus Sally Hemings at the gym, right? Or here. So did she live in that so you're really transferring somebody from a particular context. Like, these people are in Civil War battlefields. I mean, that General Pickett does not go to Kroger's with you, right? I mean, he could, but Pickett was not at Kroger's, as far as we know. But he was at that thing. So for some people, in terms of self-definition, I am reenacting because I am this character. I only know what this character would have known. right? So Sammy Hemmings did not know about the Stairmaster or the life cycle. I mean, I'm using that example just she wouldn't have known necessarily about those machines. So these are going to say, I only know what this general knew.
So it's also very much tied to place, right?
Very much in terms of this. And the Williamsburg people do know beyond, right? Because it's an educational. Williamsburg is a paid private museum. They do know about the cotton gin. They do know about the sewing machine. They do know about the American Civil War. They know about Obama. They know about all that stuff. And they will answer and then come back to 1774 or whatever. I think it has to do with location and the impersonation as much as sticking to what that person would have known. So some kind of loose script. If in a storytelling event, somebody is going to be the famous person, Thomas Jefferson, talking about, I don't know, Toni Morrison's novel, right? He would never have talked about that in real life. So that would be more of a interpretation versus reenacting, because that wouldn't have happened in real life. I think it has to do with sticking to history to some extent. Yes. Oh, yes.
I wonder if there's any acceptance of people of other races or ethnic groups that just really want to be a reenactor. For instance, you know, like you're Asian or Hispanic or something, and there really weren't, maybe a few, but not very many, fighting in the Civil War. Has there been any acceptance or any interest in that?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question, because some of those people wouldn't have been necessarily in the Civil War, but some would have been, right? If you have Irish descent, you could be one of these Irish troops that were in the Civil War. I have to admit, I don't know enough about it. I haven't talked enough to this group of people which I want to talk to, which are African Americans who reenact the American Civil War on both sides. And there was a group I was going to pursue, and then that just never happened. There was a group in North Carolina, African Americans who reenact, and that is also something that, you know, what roles do you have to stick to the actual historical reality of when African Americans were allowed to enlist on both sides, or can you just do it because you just like history, but yet you look different from, you know, so that, I think that has to do with specific units and specific people. But I think it's very, very interesting. Actually, something I wish I knew more about, and I hope to in the future. Okay.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.